So basically, the point here that the author was making is that the Torah has laws. In most cases, the Torah laws are clear, although they're not very detailed. We need the oral Torah to come and explicate the details of those halachas. Since God requires us to do the laws and warns of punishment if we transgress, if there's no details about how to do it, then the whole thing is a non-starter. Rather, God must have included some detailed information about how to fulfill the mitzvot and how to avoid transgressing the prohibitions. Where is that information located? In the oral Torah. That oral Torah came to be written down eventually. The oral Torah explains, therefore, the Torah laws. And even though it was recorded by the rabbis, that doesn't make it rabbinic. What the rabbis were doing was they were recording the oral tradition which dated back to Moshe Rabbeinu, and therefore it's the Torah's it's the explanation of what the Torah means in any given place, any particular mitzvah. That is not to be confused with the fact that sometimes the sages exercised their authority to make up new legislation of a pure rabbinic origin, and that would be rabbinic. They did not hide in any scenario, and in any case, the fact that their that it was they who were behind a particular, let's say, decree, so that the rabbis themselves made a clear distinction between what was theirs and what they were explaining from the Torah. They were not making things up, therefore. Otherwise, they would have said the whole thing came from the Torah, right? And therefore, there is a distinction between what we call Durabanan, from the rabbis, and Deraisa, where the Daled means like from. Oraisa, from the word or, like light. Oraisa. Okay? It could also relate just to the word of like Hora'ah, the path, the teaching. In any case, this is Deraisa and Durabanan. Practically speaking, in most cases, there's no difference between Durabanan and Deraisa. That's the author's point here, that we are as equally required to keep Rabbanans as we are Deraisas. We can't say, well, this is from the Torah, so I'll keep, but this is from the rabbis, I won't keep. No, you can't do that. You are equally responsible to keep Rabbanans and Deraisas. The Torah says, you shall not depart from anything that they tell you, right or left. The sages have the authority to make up decrees, and you got to keep them. So from here he says, it is God's will that the sages make these decrees, and it is God's will that the Jewish people uphold these decrees. However, he points out that there are differences between Deraisa and Rabbanan, not so much in terms of the requirement to keep it, but the application of it. So, for example, this is the first example that we got through. If there is a doubt about what to do, when it's a Torah law, you go what's called l'chumra. You have to err on the stringent side, which is generally not the case regarding Rabbanan. When you have a doubt regarding a halacha of the Rabbanan, then you are allowed to be lenient. A similar example that we gave was regarding blessings. Blessings are generally Rabbanan. When a person has a doubt about whether he made that blessing, we say, it's a suffix, Rabbanan, Lukula. He might have made the bracha, he might not have. On the side that he didn't make the bracha, the rabbis would say, make the bracha. On the other hand, if he did make the bracha, making it again would possibly involve taking God's name unnecessarily, which is a prohibition from the Torah. So we say, right, suffix Rabbanan, Lukula. An exception would be Birkas Hamazon, where the bracha is actually deraisa, it's from the Torah. When you have a suffix regarding Birkas Hamazon, then you go the Chumrah. Same thing with Birkas Torah, by the way. Birkas Torah is also deraisa. Yeah, so if a person, the blessings that we make over learning the Torah in the morning are deraisa, and therefore when if a person has a doubt as to whether he made those brachas or not, he repeats them, which is not the case regarding the other brachas. Yes, that we're just talking about Hamazon. So it would be one distinction. Not in terms of the requirement to keep, because we're required to uphold all deraisas and derabbanans, but in the case of a doubt, there is such a distinction. That brings us up to about halfway down, page 190. The line starts with the word Yudenu Lakula, and then you have a comma, and then the word Vahare. Vahare zo kumoshe tomar. This would be like saying Shaha'arayos tihiyeno bichares, v'misas beistin, Ulevishas shatnez bazara, v'shabasa b'cholov hiye osir b'hanoah, v'chelev hiye mutar, she'ein ele Ela hagvulim kefi rotzon yizbarach. He's referring to the different punishments. How did they translate in English? You have the English.
Says this, however, is very much like the fact for serious sexual misdeeds. This punishment is to be cut off or to be sentenced to death, while shatnez is only forbidden by a negative commandment. Similarly, no use whatsoever may be made of milk with meat, while forbidden fat may be.
Maybe what? Oh, maybe. Yeah, and then what?
Used for, this isn't,
yeah.
It's used for
right.
non-food purposes, even
right.
though it may not be eaten.
Right. Look, here's the point. That we can go through the details of what he's saying in the laws, but it wasn't clear to me the general purpose of why he's bringing all this. And in the larger context, what he's saying is that there is no difference between D'oraisa and D'Rabbanan, he says, in terms of our obligation to uphold those mitzvos. Now, that doesn't mean to say that there's no distinction between them. Practically speaking, there is at least one distinction among many, really, which is that in the case of doubt, when it's Torah, you go stringent, and when it's D'Rabbanan, you're lenient. He says, this is akin to the fact that we have many things within the Torah themselves which are prohibited, yeah? And each one has its own punishment, for example, if one transgresses them. But just because they have different punishments doesn't mean that some are more forbidden than the other. They're all equally forbidden. They just happen to have different punishments. That's his point. Yeah. So he's relating this back to the idea of, as far as D'oraisa and D'Rabbanan is concerned, there's no essential difference in terms of our responsibility to guard these laws, even though there's clearly a difference in stringency, that these are D'oraisas and these are D'Rabbanan. And the proof is that when you have a doubt in D'oraisa, you go to Chumrah, and D'Rabbanan go to Kula. But that doesn't matter. The essential obligation is the same regarding D'oraisas and D'Rabbanans, despite the fact that they have different levels of stringencies, just like within Torah laws themselves. The obligation to keep them is equal, even though each one has its own separate. That's his point. So now we can go over in more detail and cover maybe some of the things that you guys were discussing among yourselves. That word tomar was throwing me off, but the point here is this would be akin to saying shaharayos tien b'chares. For example, arayos. Most of the sexual prohibitions have the punishment of kares, which is being spiritually cut off. For mises based in, some of them also have mises based in, being put to death by based in. Or livish shatnez, for example, bazara, wearing shatnez, which is wearing clothing or objects which are a mixture of wool and flax, is bazara, which means a lav, and one who transgresses would get the lashes. V'shebasa b'cholav, he also b'hanor. Basa b'cholav, even though basar itself is mutter, and cholav, milk itself, is permitted. But the mixture of the two results in a prohibition which is prohibited not only by eating it, but it's also prohibited to cook it, and it's also prohibited to derive any benefit from it. Right, that's why it says here, also b'hana. Not only hana, of course, also b'chilur bishul as well. Can't eat it, you can't cook it. But in addition to that, you can't derive any benefit from it. So, for example, you can't feed it to your animals. And that's why people buy kosher dog food, not that dogs owned by Jewish people are Jewish, and not that they have to eat kosher, and not that the owners have to give them kosher food. That's not true. But in the specific instance of milk and meat mixtures, right, one is not allowed to derive benefit from them, meaning use it to feed one's animals. And therefore, dog food, for example, has to be kosher, because often it's made out of, what do you mean kosher? It's not kosher, but the point is, the kosher supervision on dog food assures that the dog food does not involve any meat and milk mixture, as dog food normally does. Of course, without the meat, it's made of non-kosher. Without the milk, it's made out of non-kosher meat.
Which is fine.
Yeah, which is fine. You can give non-kosher meat to your animal. Yeah, it just can't be a mixture of meat and milk. And then chaylev, hiye mutar. What does it mean? Chaylev is mutar. Chaylev, it's not talking about stam fats which are permitted. He's talking about fats which are prohibited to eat, but they're permitted for hana. So, for example, you can't have chaylev, which is a certain part of the fat of the animal. You can't eat it. You can't consume it, but you can certainly use it for fuel. Right? That'll be okay. So the point here is that you have many different Torah laws, and each many different Torah prohibitions, and each prohibition has its own kind of punishment associated with it. Still, she'ein ella or ein ele ella hagvulim shekefi ratzon yisbarach. These punishments are only the parameters which were decided by God. Umnam binyan chiyuv mitzvos. However, regarding the responsibility to keep these mitzvos, and in the case of transgressions, refrain from transgressing them, b'gvul shehugbulu, within the parameters that God created for them, ein hefresh ben ele le'ele klal. There's no difference between one and the other. This is where it completes the thought. Okay, so that even though there's a difference in level between D'oraisa and D'Rabbanan in terms of stringency, that doesn't make a difference in terms of our obligation to keep either form of mitzvah. Just like in the different case of Torah mitzvahs, they all have different prohibitions, different transgressions, but the responsibility to keep them all is the same. It's for this reason that the sages spent so much time going back and forth, discussing, arguing, clarifying the different types of decrees, the many decrees, which in fact are really only D'Rabbanan. And there were many details and divisions among the rabbinic laws. The reason why the sages put so much effort into the decrees, into explaining decrees, into defining the general parameters and the specific details of the rabbinic laws is because the rabbinic laws are to be taken just as seriously as the Rabbana, as the D'oraisa ones.
Because it says it here in the D'oraisa.
Yeah.
That's the reason.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because the Torah endows them with that authority. Yeah. And therefore it has to be taken very seriously.
It says Kohen, Levi, and judge, though.
Say it again?
That's what it says in the Torah. Kohen, Levi, doesn't it like Kohen, Levi, and the judge?
Yeah.
So a rabbi is considered the judge?
Well, yeah. The Kohanim in the times of the Torah were the Torah scholars disseminating the Torah to the people. That's one of the reasons why they were they were not given land, and they were freed from agricultural responsibilities, and they were supported by the community because they were the Torah scholars dispensing Torah. But over time, that was less and less the case, so that it's really referring not specifically so much to the Kohen as a Kohen, but a Kohen as a Torah scholar, and therefore anyone else who's a Torah scholar and a judge, for example, even if he's not a Kohen, still has this role as being the rabbis who set the decrees and give guidance for the people what to do.
It would seem that in modern day life, the rabbis are both the Kohanim and the Shoftim.
What do you mean? Why are you the Kohanim? Because
they're doing the role minus the avoda of the Beit HaMikdash, but
because they're being supported by the community.
In some
is that what you meant? Is that what you meant?
Oh, more that they were supporting the community spiritually, that they were.
I see. Yeah, it seems to be what you're saying is that nowadays the scholars serve the role of both the scholar and the Kohen in terms of legally guiding the people, but also spiritually being a source of inspiration for the people.
Yeah.
Very good. What I suggested is also true, that they're like Kohanim insofar as they are, because they're involved in promulgating the Torah to the Jewish people, teaching and spreading the Torah to the Jewish people, they are alleviated by God of the need to support themselves, and therefore they're supported by, for example, the tithing.
I only meant to expand on what you were saying.
So both aspects are true. The Rambam writes that nowadays anybody whose spirit so moves him that he is willing to depart from all of the luxuries of the material world and dedicate himself entirely to the study of Torah, Harezeh Kadosh Kadoshim, he's like the Holy of Holies, and he is like a Kohen who serves Hashem in the Beis HaMikdash, and he is allowed to liberate himself from the responsibilities that normally govern people's lives, supporting themselves, supporting their family and children, in order to dedicate themselves entirely to God and to the study of Torah. That's not for everybody. It's only for the few people who genuinely are willing and consistently able to do this. But in which case, the Rambam just points out that even nowadays, a Torah scholar can become like a Kohen. Yeah, in that respect. But in any case, there still is a distinction between D'oraisa and D'Rabbanan. So let's say, for example, on Shabbos, you are allowed to transgress the Shabbos you're allowed to do things which would be considered transgressing the Shabbos in ordinary circumstances when it's for what's called pikuach nefesh, in order to save a life. Now, suppose in order to save this person's life, you can either transgress a Torah Shabbos principle or a rabbinic Torah principle. A rabbinic Shabbos principle. Clearly what you do is transgress the rabbinic and not the Raisa. If it's right, if it's enough to save the person's life by just doing it as a D'Rabbanan, so you do the D'Rabbanan, not the Raisa. If you need to do a D'Oraisa to save the person's life, then you're certainly allowed to do that. However, if it's something which is like immediately life-threatening, and you don't have the time to start thinking this, that, or the other, is it D'Oraisa or is it Rabbanan? Can I do it this way, that way, the other? No, the Torah says, Kol Azari is Niskar. Anybody who goes to transgress the Sabbath more quickly, he's more greatly rewarded. Meaning, when it has to do with Pikuach Nefesh, you don't have time to start clarifying all of these points. You just do what you got to do and save the person's life. But if it's a scenario where it's not immediately life-threatening, but it could be, but in any case it warrants desecrating the Shabbos, doing things which would ordinarily be forbidden on Shabbos, so certainly what we do is we deal with the D'Rabbanans before the D'Oraisas. The same thing if, let's say, a person is sick, not on Shabbos, it's just sick, and he needs food, and the only food that's available is, let's say, non-kosher meat, like cow meat, whatever meat, or a chicken cooked in milk. Yeah, what do you do?
Chicken cooked in
milk, which is D'Rabbanan, because the Torah prohibition of meat and milk does not apply to poultry. Considering poultry meat for the purposes of meat and milk is only D'Rabbanan. And therefore, clearly, you address this person's health needs by giving him basar b'chalav, meat and milk, D'Rabbanan, poultry and milk, and not treifa, which is D'Oraisa. Okay? So, וכל בני ששילו בעיניהם הדברים האלה בבחינת חיוב בהם, כמו כל שאר מצווה שבתורה. אמנם, רצון יזברך היה שיבואו על זה הצד, but God wanted these prohibitions to come about, meaning the rabbinic prohibitions to come about, that they should come from us. So they have God's seal of approval, but He wanted us to come up with it. והנה, הדבר שווה שיצווינו שנשים תותפוס בין עינינו, או שיצווינו שיגזור עלינו גזירוס לשמירת תורתו, זוהי מצווה שצורת עשייתו באופן זה, וזה צורת עשייתו באופן זה, וגדרון אחד שהוא עשיית רצון יתברך וגזרתו. He says this is like, וזה הדבר שווה, this would be like the fact that God commanded us that we should put totofos, meaning the tefillin, between our eyes, or shitzavenu shenigzor aleinu gzeros l'shmiras toraso, or that He decreed upon us that we should make decrees to guard the Torah, to safeguard the Torah. Zo mitzvah shetzuras asiyos b'ofen zeh. The one mitzvah has its parameters of performing it in one way, and the other in this way. But the protective quality of the two are the same. Is the doing of God's will, right? So when you put on tefillin, or when you keep some rabbinic mitzvah whose purpose is to safeguard the Torah, you're really doing the same thing, right? Which is doing God's will. In the one case, you're doing what God wants as He expressed in the Torah. In the other, you're doing God's will because He wants people to be safeguarded from transgressing the Torah. And so it's the same, whether it's D'oraisa or Rabbanan. And that which the rabbis received as the explanation for this particular mitzvah, Gam kenhu shi'e koyach beyad beis din levatel davar min haTorah. It also includes that beis din was given the authority to nullify a law from the Torah, kishi'e letachlis shmiras haTorah atzmo, when nullifying the law of the Torah should be for the purpose of safeguarding the Torah itself. We discussed this scenario, right? Where the sages, for example, decreed that when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, you don't blow the shofar, even though God says Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, you do blow the shofar. Sages say no.
Well, God says yes.
Yeah. All due respect to you, God. We're putting your mitzvah aside. We are not going to allow the Jewish people to fulfill the mitzvah of shofar when Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbos, because people may come to carry in the public domain the shofar, which would be transgressing the Torah, and therefore, God, we're concerned that even though you weren't, we are. The people are going to come and carry on Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah, the shofar, and therefore we're not going to let anybody blow. It's not so much the Erev, because the Erev is really is Dorobanan, but it's referring to taking out from Rishus Yochid to Rishus Rabbi, from a private domain to a public domain, which is prohibited from the Torah, or alternatively, carrying it, what's called 4 amos in the public domain. There's also a transgression from the Torah. So the sages said, if we let people blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, which is Shabbos, they might come to carry or take out the shofar, which would transgress the Shabbos. Therefore, we are suspending the Torah law. No shofar blowing this year to God.
Fair enough.
Yeah. That's also in their authority.
Do they have any special procedure that they need to go through to nullify a Torah law that was not necessary just to make a new rabbinical law?
No, they just had to make the decree, really.
So I think Shabbos is supposed to be more special anyways, because it happens once a week.
More special than Rosh Hashanah? Yeah, I mean, the truth is, there's really nothing wrong with blowing the shofar on Shabbat. There's no prohibition of blowing on Shabbat. It's not like God suspends a prohibition for Rosh Hashanah on Shabbat. No, it's just there's really nothing wrong with blowing the shofar on Shabbat. And God was not concerned about the fact that people might come to carry. The rabbis were concerned about that, and therefore it said no blowing.
Did the rabbis prohibit it on Shabbat, or just remove the requirement?
Prohibit it.
It's safeguarding another transgression.
Yes, exactly. Safeguarding safeguarding. So that's what he's saying here. That also included in the rabbi's divinely ordained authority was the ability to nullify a law in the Torah. However, that's only within the context of, like we mentioned, b'shev al taseh. What does that mean? Sit and don't do. Meaning, the sages uprooted laws in the Torah for the purpose of preserving the Torah, specifically through the dynamic of refraining from doing. God says do, we tell you don't do. Passive resistance. Yeah? But active rebellion, that's something else. Shev al taseh means sit and don't do. Refrain from fulfilling by remaining inactive. But v'lo b'kum baseh. But not, God forbid, that the sages will come and say, transgress what the Torah tells you not to do. That, no. Val pizeh, a shoresh, gozru masha gozru b'shofar v'lulav v'yom Shabbos, in exactly the case we gave. Kimuvu b'mishnah v'shas, and it's for this reason the sages decreed what they did on the shofar, the lulav, on Shabbos, as it explains in the Mishnah in Shas, in Rosh Hashanah, kefi a-kabbalah hazois sha'isa b'yadam, according to the Kabbalah that they had in their hands, that they had the authority to do such things, to nullify laws in the Torah in the context of Shev al Taseh for the purpose of preserving the Torah.
What are their qualifications to have to be in the Beit Din?
So that's a very good question.
Yeah,
that's a very good question. This law, which in the Torah, giving the authority to the sages to make these decrees, only applied to the sages of Talmudic times, but no later. And why?
What happened the Mishnah times, like Rabbi Gamliel?
Yeah, so those are Talmudic times. Yeah, Mishnah is the early Talmudic time, and Gemara is the latter Talmudic time, but they're all Talmudic times. So only sages of the Talmud could make, meaning of the Mishnah period or the Gemara period, could make decrees. But after that, there's no such thing as rabbinic laws, meaning laws that come about through the through Beis Din.
But does that say that we already have and have had for 1,000 years or more all the laws we could ever need?
That means that we have all of the laws that we could ever need. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. So someone would argue we have more than we need. Yeah, but that's right. Yeah, that all of the Torah laws are in place and they're binding, and whatever rabbinic legislation was deemed necessary was decreed by the Talmudic sages, but no rabbi after the time of the Talmud has the authority to initiate decrees, new laws. What rabbis have been doing since that time, so the Shulchan Aruch was not making up law. What he was doing was presenting the law, or maybe deciding between two opinions about what the halacha should be. But he was not making up any new laws.
He did his research and broke it down for us.
Yeah. But he didn't originate any new laws. What rabbis are involved in doing is maybe originating new halachas, but they're not making up new laws. What they're doing is they are extending the pre-existing halacha, deraisa or derabanan, to new scenarios. But the legal principles are the same, right? What's new, what's novel is the application to new scenarios. Yeah.
I don't understand. Like, regardless of how great Talmudic sages were, and their great understanding of the Torah, if God says I'm not worrying about something, what gives the human the right to say, oh, well, we're going to worry about it? Even though, God, you're not worried about it, we're going to worry about it and not do something you tell us to do. Just doesn't make sense to me.
So that's the point, that God made provision for this in the Torah. God said, this is my law, but I'm also endowing rabbis of certain stature the ability to add on to that law.
Add on, though, not take away.
So including, adding on to the law. I mean, the authority to be lawmakers is that they can actually suspend the Torah law as well when they felt that doing so would safeguard the Torah. So God, that's the point that he was making here, right? That the lawmakers not only make laws, but they can actually suspend Torah law for the purpose of maintaining the Torah law. That's part of the authority that they were endowed with.
How would God make it?
So God was not concerned about it, and the sages were, but God says that's okay.
Why would God make a law that would go against his own law?
Well, it's comparable to the U.S. Constitution, which makes its own provision for itself to be changed.
Don't even compare the two. We're talking about the Constitution and the Torah. We're in two different worlds.
But it's saying that it's not so implausible to say that I'm specifying that you can change my law if you find a need.
Yeah, again, they're not changing the law. What they're doing is suspending the law.
God says don't leave.
Like they can't nullify or negate a law, and they can't change a law. What they can do is, again, they can suspend the performance of a law when that's for the purpose of, according to their estimation, preserving the Torah.
But the only way they could have made that calculation is if to say that breaking Shabbos is worse than not blowing the shofar. So where did they get that from?
So that's obvious. Yeah, that's obvious. I mean, a person who transgresses Shabbos willingly, for example, is liable to the death penalty. Right? Even if it's by accident, it's still an accidental transgression of a very severe transgression. No, it's not. It's not. No. But I'm just saying that the law itself is very stringent. If a person does it intentionally, he's liable for death penalty, which means even if he does it by accident, he's still accidentally transgressing a very severe transgression. As far as shofar is concerned, there's no transgression involved. What they're doing is they are lacking a mitzvah. Right? So it's a lot more serious to transgress the Shabbos, even by mistake, than it is to refrain from fulfilling a mitzvah. In the one case, you're transgressing, and the other, you're just not keeping. And that's why I said here that the rabbi's authority was only extended as far as saying, Sheva al taseh, passively refraining from fulfilling, as opposed to actually kum va'ase, act proactively transgressing. Sages never told you to proactively transgress the Torah. There are some few examples where we gave es lasos l'Hashem, but by and large, the sages couldn't do that.
So would you say that this is the same idea if you're sleeping in on Shabbat, making you stay in your room, not breaking the Shabbat, but also you didn't fulfill the mitzvah of listening to the Torah like we spoke earlier?
So yes,
Same idea?
It's like sleeping in and refraining from fulfilling the mitzvot. Yes,
Yeah, but you're not transgressing because you didn't.
Yes, that's right.
Same
That's
idea.
right. Yeah.
Okay, second question. Why would God make two laws, saying, okay, blow the shofar Yom Teruah,
Yeah.
and don't whatever that was called?
Don't carry.
Carry. He made two laws. That both are. Why would I make two laws on the?
There are many laws. There are many laws, and sometimes, more often, they're independent one of the other. But sometimes there's a confluence of them, and this is exactly the point. That's
why we need rabbinic laws because of that.
That's why you need rabbinic laws, or sometimes the rabbis are coming to explain what the Torah law is. So, for example, you're not allowed to light fire on Shabbat. Even if you have a fire that's lit, you're not allowed to put food on that fire to cook it, but you are allowed to burn the sacrifices on Shabbos. So, and these are both Torah laws.
Mm-hmm.
These are both Torah laws.
Good point.
Yeah, and they operate simultaneously. So God's like, in my house, right? You're allowed to cook food, but in your house, you're not. Cooking in Shabbos is prohibited, but for the purpose of the korbanos, it's permitted. Why? Because the Torah tells us, the sages explain to us how the Torah tells us, the sages explain to us how the Torah tells us that korbanos are permitted to be burned on. You're not allowed to light a fire for the purpose of bringing the korbanos, but if you have a fire which is lit, that was done. It was used to burn the sacrifices in Shabbos.
Very clear.
Yeah.
Clarified.
Okay.
Check.
Okay. Good. Check. All right. Very good.
The other thing that bothers me is the idea that there cannot come again more rabbis that are qualified and authorized to.
There can, but they have to be deemed as authoritative in order to make the change.
And how can they be deemed authoritative?
Well, first of all, there can be a reestablishment of the Sanhedrin, a reinstitution of Smicha, and a reinstitution of Sanhedrin. And what's that? Yeah, Sanhedrin, full Sanhedrin. Yeah, the Sanhedrin. I think so. Yeah, the Sanhedrin. Yeah. So, but until that happens, then you really do not have a Beis Din which is qualified and authoritative enough to change any of the decrees. But despite the fact that there is generally what we call Yeridas Adoros, a spiritual digression throughout the years, so that according to natural flow of things, every progressive generation is going to be further away on a lower spiritual level than earlier ones and could not change those decrees. That nevertheless theoretically can change. There will be a time when there will be redemption, and Mashiach will come, and the spiritual level of the Jewish people will be elevated back to a level that it was in earlier times and even greater. And in which case, the Beis Din could undo legislation for previous Beis Dins. Yeah, but why would you undo it unless there was some problem? So, generally speaking, the decrees were decreed by great sages, and they've proven to be to maintain wisdom throughout the generations.
I was going to say it was put into when they made these laws. They had in mind for many generations.
Yeah, for all times.
All time. They knew they could upkeep it.
Yeah, they had it in mind for all times, unless unless some strange thing happened. So there are exceptions, which we mentioned. For example, the decree that people should not learn Torah if they've had a seminal mission was uprooted. However, it wasn't uprooted because a future Beis Din uprooted it, but it never took root because the Jewish people never accepted upon themselves. And then an example of where the sages nevertheless did make a decree which transgressed the Torah, even though normally we say that's not the case. They say suspend a Torah law by passively refraining from fulfilling it. but not to change a law by actively transgressing it. One exception to that is the writing down of the oral Torah, which we mentioned, that God prohibits in the Torah writing down the oral Torah. The sages came along and said, God, the things are now in a state where if it's not written down, it's likely to be seriously forgotten. So, all due respects, God, and all due respect to your prohibition against writing it down, we are going to write it down nonetheless. Yeah, because if not, the whole thing could be lost. And therefore, the committing to writing of the oral Torah itself involved transgressing a prohibition. Yeah, it's in the Torah. It's in the Torah. I don't remember the exact place in the Torah where we derive the fact that the Torah Sheba'al Peh has to remain Ba'al Peh and can't be written down. But eventually, the sages did extend their authority to actually transgress this prohibition and write down the Torah again for the purpose of preserving it, so that it shouldn't get lost. Okay, let's stop here.